Thank you so much for joining us for another episode. I won't waste too much of your time so we can get right into our conversation. Now, today I have the tremendous fortune of talking to Timothy Suchomel. Tim is an associate professor and director of the Sports Science Master's Program at University of Pittsburgh. He has published over 110 peer-reviewed journal articles on topics like strength and power development, weightlifting movements and their derivatives, eccentric training, post-activation potentiation, and athlete monitoring. He has served the National Strength and Conditioning Association as the chair of the Sports Science Special Interest Group and is currently the senior associate editor of the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research and the associate editor for Strength and Conditioning Journal. He has received many accolades, including the 2019 NSCA State Director of the Year and the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research Editorial Excellence Award in 2023, among others. We're actually here at the NSCA National Conference where he will be presenting on training muscular strength. So he is here to talk to us all about that, as well as his new book, Science and Development of Muscular Strength. So thank you so much. Like we were just talking about, we were at the NSCA conference. It's been a little bit of a journey trying to find a perfect location for this, but I appreciate your patience. I appreciate you willing to spend a little bit of time because I know you have a very busy week.
Yeah, it's great to be able to do this, and being able to do this live at the NSCA conference is great, and I'm looking forward to talking about it.
All right, so I ran through a brief bio for you. You've accomplished quite a bit already in your career, but I'm always interested in kind of the origin story. What interested you in fitness and strength and conditioning, getting into this industry, and how did you get to this point where you are at in your career?
Every journey, for people in our field usually starts the same spot. All of us are interested in sport, and I was an athlete. I'm not an overly big guy, so I always had to kind of find different ways to become successful and to challenge myself, but also get playing time and things like that. So anytime we had to do something like that, it was always I need to be lifting, but thinking back of my programs, what I did then versus what I would do now are completely opposite. But at the exact same time, I think through that process, really learning that I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach, to be able to help individuals, whether people like myself or other individuals who are already genetically gifted, and being able to get them to the next level and everything. But that kind of led to an internship with Dr. Bill Eben at Marquette University, and his track record of publishing and everything. I didn't know what really much about research at the time, and I was able to do that internship. And I remember walking in the first day, and he says, "We have 12 different research projects going on, and I want you involved in as many of them as we can." So taking that initiative and kind of learning about the research process from him, and but mainly learning about how it can be applied to training and improving the performance of athletes is something that I'm forever grateful. But that led to a master's degree at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse.
Okay.
During that time, I was still able to do my master's research, but also be able to coach at the exact same time. So it was a kind of best of both worlds things. But then, I realized that I really enjoyed the research side of things and wanted to kind of do my own research and not someone else's. So I went and pursued a PhD under Mike Stone at East Tennessee State. So, and of course, anyone who knows Dr. Stone, strength is king. So,
right.
That kind of led to a lot of the different projects and everything with different topics and athlete monitoring as well. But, throughout the years, it's been the tried and true thing, strength and power. And, we start kind of investigating different things related to how to emphasize strength characteristics and how they, they relate to sport performance. So, and ultimately this led to presentations, publications, and thankfully recently this book.
Right. Something that stood out to me when you were just talking there is it's kind of funny. You mentioned that when you were younger and you were playing sports, you knew that you had to get stronger. You knew strength and conditioning had to be part of it. But looking back now, your training probably would have been completely different.
Sets of 10 was very prevalent in my program, but at the time, you know, I didn't really understand why or what benefits. So, yeah, I did 10s to death, but you know, being a small guy, you know, size is only going to get you so far, and you know, you get a little stronger at least initially, but yeah, if I was truly training for maximal strength, I definitely wasn't doing it the right way.
That's funny, but I think that's so true of a lot of us, though, in thinking about, I mean, like we're both coaches, and thinking about like some of those first programs that I wrote. Like I look back now and I'm thinking, what in the world was I doing? Like could this athlete have been even better if you know, if I had the knowledge back then that I do now?
Absolutely.
So, and that's really where we get into your book. This book is so thorough. I know that I mentioned just a little bit ago before we started recording here that you know, I love this book already. I'm really impressed with it, and I think one of the things that stands out, you know, is that working in this industry, I think that you know, you have a certain definition of strength, like what you think strength is. I think that saying is true that you know, that the more we learn, the less we realize we know.
Sure.
So that we always have to keep learning. And I think that's very true about strength here. So I think there are some common definitions of strength, but you challenge the reader right off the bat in the book to kind of rethink the definition of strength. So can you explain that to us a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm guilty of it too. You know, coming through, strength was kind of a single entity. It was, you know, how much weight you can lift and everything, you know, the classic social media, how much you bench, bro, you know, and again, you know, jokingly, but that seems to be, or at least has been in the past, a common thought of that strength is this, you know, single focus, how much weight you can lift, and then you know, relative strength is how much weight you can lift per your body weight, which is, you know, a lot of those weight class based sports. We were just talking about weightlifting prior to this. But you know, strength is multifaceted in a sense, and I think the learning under Doc Stone really put that into perspective. And you know, I provide different definitions of strength in here. What maximal strength is, absolute, relative, but also, you know, things like reactive strength and having it be, you know, a faster strength. But we also have strength, speed, strength, endurance. You know, strength is going to be a central focus to the development of a single athlete within the program in multiple ways. But I would also challenge the reader when they go through that chapter to really think about, if maximal strength always improves, does the athlete always improve? Okay. And that's an honest question, because it's not always the case. As much as we would like it to be, you know, this person lifts twice their body weight, 2.5 times their body weight, and they're going to be this elite athlete. It just doesn't happen all that time. So this comes down to kind of modifying a little bit to a point Dr. Stone's definition of it in terms of strength is the ability to produce force. So, but on top of that, because it is multifaceted, you know, we have some athletes that are just dealing with their body weight, you know, gymnasts and wrestlers, and but also an opponent. So if we have a football lineman, again going back to wrestling, but we also have individuals who are dealing with implements. Are you kicking a ball? Are you swinging a bat? You know, all these different things. So we added to that strength is the ability to produce force against an external resistance, because the external resistance can change. But there's a third facet to it in terms of the actual task that is being performed, because we put force into a soccer ball differently if we are passing a ball versus shooting a ball. You know, if I'm going to lift a barbell off the floor, is it going to be light or is it going to be heavy? So within a task-specific context is the third piece of it. So the overall definition that we focus on within the book is strength is the ability to produce force against an external resistance in a task-specific context. And one of the things we also touch on in this chapter is how force is being produced during different tasks. So we have braking characteristics and propulsive characteristics. So there's two figures specifically that look at the net forces that are being produced, which all goes back to, jokingly, the first strength coach, Isaac Newton. So, you know, with Newton's laws, you know, understanding that acceleration and velocity and everything come from net force. So looking at how much force is being produced and kind of the shape of that curve a little bit, or the impulse.
Okay.
So in addition to that, we also put it into a time-specific context, in the sense that if I'm doing a max velocity sprint, I may only have 90 milliseconds on the ground to produce the necessary forces to propel myself. But at the same exact time, a squat with 70% on the bar may take a full 2.5 seconds to complete.
Okay,
from the initial, unweighting phase to when I stand up and get steady again. So, it's very contextual, but again, the ability to produce force within those different contexts is really what strength is.
And so you mentioned a couple of things there. I want to go back to the different kinds of strengths that you talked about in the book. You did mention, absolute strength, relative strength. You talk about concentric strength, eccentric strength, isometric strength. Pretty much every form of strength there. I know you mentioned strength endurance, strength speed, speed strength, which I know we could go back and forth about that.
Sure.
Reactive strength. I know that this is kind of a big question, but for listeners that might not be familiar with those, and I don't expect you to go on for hours about this, but can you kind of explain what some of those are and what some of those actually mean?
Yeah, I mean, absolute strength is essentially the amount of weight that you can lift without taking body weight into context, versus relative strength is taking your body weight into context. In addition to that, so strength endurance is this idea of, we may not have to produce maximal force production the entire time, but it is, what can you produce over a longer period of time? So if I'm performing multiple repetitions, so it's kind of like your sets of 10 idea, or like longer duration activities where you're producing sub-maximal forces. So even applying it to like a marathon, you're not going to produce maximal force every single step. It's going to be sub-maximal.
Right.
Now, keep in mind, strength endurance is not the same thing as cardiorespiratory endurance.
Okay, right.
So cardiorespiratory having to do with oxygen and delivery of oxygen to the muscles and using it for energy. But in addition to that, reactive strength has to do with a fast stretch shortening cycle in terms of transitioning from the eccentric action to the concentric action very quickly, so within a very short period of time. Eccentric strength, as listeners may imagine, it is the eccentric action only. So we can measure that by doing an eccentric only squat to a certain depth, or pins in a squat rack. Bench press, same thing. Concentric strength is just the opposite, just the concentric muscle action. But then being able, the strength, speed, strength has to do with the idea of what type of load are you moving. So strength, speed being a heavier load, attempting to move it quickly, versus speed, strength is going to be a light load moving very quickly. And obviously there's a spectrum of all of these within individual exercises. It's never going to be as simple as we would like it to be, but yeah, context is king when it comes to every single one of these modes of strength, if you will.
I think the idea of speed, strength, and strength, speed is something I'm trying to get my athletes to understand a little better. We were just talking about some of the Olympic lifts right before this, and I might have them, doing a clean or a snatch, and I try to get across the idea, depending on what, I guess, phase of training they're in, where they're at in relation to their sports season beginning or end season, the idea that it's okay to go a little bit lighter and go for speed, as opposed to just loading the bar up as much as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to our different phases of training, we're always going to have an emphasis in terms of what we're trying to work on, and obviously from a speed strength standpoint, laying the foundation to be able to do that. And we talk about with strength in general, there's always going to be a magnitude, how much force is being produced. There's always going to be a rate at which we produce that force, but then there's also going to be a duration over which we are applying that force. So yeah, it's very unique when it comes to different lifts, especially when you modify what load it is, because we may shift on the spectrum to more of a strength speed at some point, but then we'll shift back to speed strength, maybe in a taper or like a peaking phase. Okay,
and I mean, we're talking about strength here, so I think a question that comes up quite a bit is, how strong is strong enough? I don't know if you have a good answer for that. I think that's something that's kind of debated, depending on I guess what the focus is of the program or for the particular athlete or individual. But I guess what do you say about that? How strong is strong enough?
Sure, and I've gotten that question multiple times, and I kind of laugh at the question because it's putting everything into context as well. Because if you think about an athlete in terms of their ability to produce force, no athlete will ever tell you, I'm too strong,
right?
Or I'm producing too much force. I'm producing force too quickly, coach. So, because no athlete would ever tell you that, you could make the argument that you can never be too strong.
Okay.
So within that context, obviously. But I would also say that if you're looking at something in terms of relative strength, if you are continuing to improve relative strength, but their performance isn't improving, then you could say that they are strong enough within the context of whatever tasks they're trying to improve.
Okay.
But that also comes back to, deeper concepts like motor learning and the tactical piece of it, because we're also working in team atmosphere and a variety of other things too. So, but just a simple example is if I continue to get relatively stronger with my squat, if I'm not getting faster in my sprint as a sprinter, then I probably hit my ceiling with that, and I need to modify the stimulus to be able to continue to enhance that. But again, also sprinting is so unique in applying force that I'm not always going to get better just by squatting.
Right.
Like a sprinter is going to get better by sprinting and working on very unique pieces of it.
Absolutely, and I think that's where I've been guilty of it in the past. Like, an athlete might want to focus so much on strength, thinking that they do want to continue getting stronger. But at some point, like you just said, like you do have to start working more on speed and more on that power component that goes into it. Now, all of this kind of interrelates, and you mentioned task-specific strength. And I think it's interesting in the book you mentioned the idea of sport-specific. And we hear that all the time. People want to do sport-specific training, or like you mentioned in the book, coaches ask you to do sport-specific training. So I guess kind of explain the difference there, and in a little more what you mean by task-specific and how that might be a more appropriate term than sport-specific.
Yeah, so sport-specific training, as we've all dealt with as strength and conditioning coaches, you get a coach that'll ask you, we want sport-specific training.
Right.
Now, what I would like to counter that with is generally a question of what is that? I'm not trying to be a smart aleck or anything like that, but you want to understand what they mean by that. Well, it may come down to, I want them to change direction better. Okay, then let's talk about that, because changing direction better is multifaceted in itself. I need to be in the right body position. I need the individual to react a certain way to a stimulus, if necessary, an opponent or whatever. But I also need to be able to apply force specifically within that task itself. So is that task going to be a shallow angle or a wide angle? A difference between 180 degrees versus 45 degrees of a cut is going to be very unique, right? Because they need to be in a certain position to be successful. But in addition to that, any change of direction is going to have a deceleration component and an acceleration component. If we can't accelerate well, we're probably not going to change direction very well.
True.
So, so within that, you can make the argument that whether it is a change of direction, or if we take football for example, they want to throw the ball farther, right? As in quarterback. So if that's the case, how do I get someone to throw a ball farther? Well, they have to put more force into the ground, right? But they also have to synchronize their timing with all of the unique aspects of transmitting force from the lower body through the torso to the upper body, with the rotation component and everything. So task-specific strength is more applicable than sport-specific strength, because we are trying to focus on an individual task in terms of improving it.
What's your experience been like in trying to relay that to coaches? Or
well, you can make the argument that general strength characteristics can certainly relate to a lot of different tasks, as some of our research has shown, and there's relationships with different measurements of strength and performance and all that. But at the same exact time, being able to speak the sport is really important.
Okay.
And also being able to have them understand. I think what a lot of them are thinking about is an exercise that looks like the actual task that's being performed. So you come into this idea of dynamic correspondence and, well, we don't want to use a weightlifting movement because we're not training weightlifters. That's right, we're not, but we're training a movement that applies to the actual task that you're talking about. One of my mentors actually uses weightlifting derivatives with golfers.
Okay.
I mean, so you think about that is the actual rotation component, but then the extension of the hip, knee, and ankles during a drive. So if I can drive the ball farther, then I'm going to have, I know it's more nuanced than this, but potentially simpler shots because they're shorter distances. So with that in mind, there's a lot of task-specific strength that can be developed using general movements.
Absolutely, and I think that's something that I'd never really put it in that context until we were talking, and then obviously when I read it in the book there, I had part of me has wanted to get away from the idea of sport specific because I know there's so much crossover between sports, as far as training. But you really did an excellent job in the book, just kind of explaining that. And I believe you're presenting on this specific topic, at the conference here this week. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that in your presentation. So I don't know if the presentations will be available to be streamed later on when this is actually released, but hopefully people can listen to that too.
Yeah, hopefully. I know that they usually record a handful of them, and I usually try to get that on NSCA TV. So that's usually something where a lot of the talks at the national conference usually end up there.
What has been, so you talked about a lot of the research that you've done, whether that was in graduate school and now obviously, I guess what is the most surprising or unique thing that you found in your research, relating to strength?
That relative strength actually does make a pretty massive difference in terms of the stimulus that you can get somebody. So we're working on a project right now, and it has chapter 6, I think, is advanced training methods. So we're looking at a lot of accentuated eccentric loading right now, and one of the things that I'm writing up currently has to do with the differences in terms of a stimulus during traditional squats that have no weight releasers versus maximal and super maximal AEL, where the first repetition of a set has either 100% of someone's max or 110% of their max, and then looking at their braking and propulsion characteristics during the actual squat repetitions themselves. And what we found is essentially the only difference during regular squats is that stronger individuals, in this case, those who could squat double body weight versus those who couldn't, their duration of the propulsion phase is shorter, which makes sense because they're going to stand up faster out of the hole. But at the same exact time, when you look at the effect sizes and the kind of the practical implications of it when you add weight releasers, now what you get is an individual with relatively stronger individuals that can produce greater braking forces over a shorter period of time that can then translate to the propulsion phase and produce greater propulsion forces over a shorter period of time. So you almost have this within set potentiation idea. So within this, potentiation in itself is an advanced training concept. So adding more layers to this, but the idea is that stronger individuals can produce a more peaked shape of an impulse, meaning they're producing more force over a shorter period of time, or even if it was the same forces over a short period of time, it's still going to be a more peaked one, versus a weaker individual may actually produce less force over a longer period of time, despite producing the same impulse value.
Wow.
So the shape of the impulse is really what I'm going to be talking about when it comes to the talk here at NSCA, where it comes down to, when it comes to exercise choice and things like that, we're chasing the shape of an impulse rather than chasing an individual exercise.
Okay. Yeah, that's all very fascinating. Very interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to finding out even more about that. You said that's research, things that you're working on right now?
Yeah, it's working on right now, so hopefully I can get that submitted soon if I get the time.
Right. Yeah. I'll definitely be looking forward to that. Hopefully I'll be able to get a hold of that and read some of that. This has been a really interesting, a really fascinating conversation. like you said, if you have the time,
Yeah,
you made that comment. I know that you have a very busy, day and week here, so I don't want to take up too much more of your time. But no, I genuinely appreciate you taking a little bit of your time here, at the conference so that we can talk about this. Like I mentioned, that this isn't my personal copy right here, but I am getting a copy. Just looking through it, I just learned so much in it. I want to keep it on hand as a reference. There's so much good information in it for everyone listening. Go ahead and grab your own copy, please. It's available on our website, us.humankinetics.com. He talks about, a lot of what we talked about today in our conversation, so much more that goes into it. In the book, Tim defines strength, like we talked about. He gets into the mechanisms of training, training methods, program design, which we did talk about a little bit. There's a full chapter on, on concurrent training, which I'm interested in. We didn't get to talk a lot about that today. Measuring and testing. There's actually a chapter or section on nutrition, which I think is very interesting as it relates to strength, recovery. It really has a little bit of everything. You did a tremendous job on it. Like I said, it's available on our website, us.humankinetics.com. I haven't looked. I'm sure it's available many other places as well. So again, definitely appreciate your time. I will give you the last word here. If you have a take-home message about strength, but definitely let the listeners know where they can follow you to keep up with all the information.
Yeah, I appreciate the time and the opportunity to really talk about this. It has been a kind of a full culmination project over the course of a couple of years, but I'm glad we were able to do it. But yeah, I would welcome any questions and anything when it comes to the book, because this is something I'm obviously passionate about. But all my socials are at Dr. T. Suchomel, and again, happy to talk about this and any other things related to strength and power.